Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join real estate entrepreneur and mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Guys, welcome back to Construct Your Life. This is Austin Linney here. It's always nice. Let me tell you something. There's just something different about us Texas boys. We like to roll in packs. So we got Mr. Ken Wimberly here. How you doing, sir?
Dynamite. How you doing, Austin?
I'm doing good, man. We got to catch up a little bit. You know, with my guests, I like to let them kind of start their story where they want to, and then we'll kind of see where it takes us from there.
Yeah. Well, so I'll roll back to the beginning, I guess, if we could. So I born and raised in Dallas, Fort Worth. So born in Fort Worth, Texas, raised most of my life in Arlington, Texas, suburban but I was raised by a single parent household. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old. And in fact, that's the very first memory I have of my life is my parents getting divorced. And so that kind of set me up in my early childhood with that. And then mom was a loving mom, but an alcoholic mom. And she was at the bars as much time as she was taking care of us. So that was kind of the framework for my early on life. And I remember at, 11 years old, I watched the movie Taps. Right. It was Tom Cruise's first movie about the military school. And after watching that movie, I went into my mom and I said, "Hey, I want to go to military school." And 6 months later, there I was. I was 12 years old and I enrolled at Kemper Military School. And so I spent the next 4 years of my life, like with discipline and structure, organization, in crazy kinds of discipline at that military school at those times. But it worked for me. It worked for me really well. And so I graduated from Kemper a year early. As much as I enjoyed being there, I wanted to get out of there. I said, okay, let me get out. So I took correspondence courses. I skipped a year of school, graduated a year early, and valedictorian of the school. And then went to college, made a 1.2 my first semester in college. And I got my act together and eventually ended up at TCU here in Fort Worth, local college here. And 1 year into my TCU career, we as America went to war with Iraq at Gulf War I. And so it was 1990, 91. So I enlisted in the Navy at that point and spent 91 to 94 in the Navy serving our country. Spent 2 years living in Japan and never set foot on a boat on this. I was air crew the whole time. So I was on board EP3Es, flying, doing intelligence, air crew ops. So went to 8 countries in a couple of years and had a very positive military experience. I'm really grateful for my time there. I've met some dear friends. In fact, I'm going next weekend to spend time with 2 of my military buddies. But anyway, got out of the military, finished my career at TCU, and got into insurance and investments out of college. I had my degree in finance with a real estate background. Got immediately into insurance investments, had all my series licenses, and did that for a couple of years. And then the entrepreneurial bug bit me, and I decided to go be a restaurateur. And I, with one of my Navy buddies, in fact, one of the guys I'm going to see next weekend, we opened up a pizza restaurant in the year 2000. So I'd actually worked at this pizza restaurant in college, and then so we basically licensed their recipes and went and opened up a version of our own, and we made, so many mistakes. We thought we were going to do it so right. We were going to be the next, $1 billion franchise there. And 18 months later, we found ourselves bankrupt. And it was a very humbling experience to go through that and to have to lay all these people off, to have to, forfeit money to our suppliers because we had no money. And it was a rough time. It was a really low point time in my life there. And it kind of pulled ourselves up out of that. I had gotten married in 2000 as well. So, hey, happy, just got married and then went and filed bankruptcy there. So, any case, I kind of came out of that, stayed in the restaurant business for a year, and then eventually found my way into the real estate business. And so that was October 2002, got into the real estate business. I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my time in the real estate business just doing, it's all commercial real estate. I've never it's still to this day, never sold a house. It's all been, or I've sold houses, but they've been, with realtors that I've hired to sell them for me. And, but it's all been commercial real estate. In the first 4 or 5 years, it was all land deals. I worked for residential land developers, and I would go help them find land tracts and assemble land tracts so they could buy them. And then they would get them entitled, put zoning in place, put the utilities and infrastructure in place, and then sell the lots to home builders. So I spent a bunch of time doing that. And then eventually started putting together some deals of my own in, buying some land tracts. Hey, I see what they're doing. We could kind of do this on our own. So I started getting together with partners, putting some deals of our own together. And that was going well. And then, 2008 came along and everything was going gangbusters. And then the markets just froze up. And in essence, July of 2008 is when the commercial real estate market froze up. Certainly the land market's there. And so from that point, just continued focusing on brokerage. Eventually in October 2009, made my way into the Keller Williams ecosystem, got kind of brought into that and really resisted that for a while. But as I got brought in, I became really, really good friends with one of the guys that had kind of brought me into that organization. He taught me a lot about leadership and about team and leading through other people. And so kind of with his guidance and help there, I ended up going from kind of a solo real estate agent into building a very robust business right there. We became the number one commercial real estate team in all of the KW ecosystem, focusing really on net lease investment properties is what we did. Prior to starting to learn that, I didn't know anything about it. But in 2011, we said, all right, that's the market we want to get into. So we dove into the single tenant net lease business and built a very thriving business around that. And that then led to opportunity to invest and build a Keller Williams Market Center franchise. And from there, we started doing some other investments again and getting back into investments. And that led to one of our real estate investments led to opening up a laundromat company. So now I've got a couple of partners and we're opening many laundromats out there right now. And around that same time, it opened the door. I had some changes in the real estate business. I actually parted ways with some of my team that I'd built and freed up some bandwidth. And I started Legacy of Love, which is now kind of called Legacy Journal. It's a parent to child journaling app that helps parents and grandparents to kind of capture moments, memories, lessons, things that you want to pass on to your children as they get older. And really something that can be, in the worst case, a backstop in the event of your death, right? You're gone. And these are your, the most precious asset your children will ever have will be your words and the things that you've left, the lessons you've left behind for them. And so we created this app and started building that. And it's allowed me to pursue a passion project. All these investments have paid off or continue to pay off. We continue to make more investments. And now I am full-time pursuing, Legacy Journal and building that, getting it out into the world. And at the same time with a couple of partners, building Laundry Luv. There's a lot of love in my world, Legacy of Love, Laundry Luv. And our laundromat company is thriving as well. So that's the quick story of Ken's life.
No, I love that. And there's something in there. It's interesting because I had the option when my parents divorced when I was 17 to go to military school or Fannette, Texas. So I chose Fannette, Texas. But
probably a good choice.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is you said there is, I think what a lot of people don't understand is as I look back on my younger days, I think I was craving that discipline. I think people have it twisted. I think that, and I even tried to go to the Coast Guard, couldn't get in the Coast Guard because I had some broken bones in my face and some asthma. And it's amazing to me as I look back, it's, what do you think that discipline, a lot of parents don't want to give it. A lot of parents, are worried about it. But as I look back on it, I'm really excited that my parents were, not hard on me, but definitely disciplined with me.
You're so right. And I think certainly as children, most of us and most like my children would say, no, we want less discipline. We don't want more discipline. We don't want more structure as children. However, I guarantee you, my children, as they're now older, would look back and say, I appreciate the discipline. I appreciate the structure. I appreciate the love that came from that discipline and the routine that you put into our lives. And I needed that early on. And I didn't know that that's what I needed. But when I saw military school, I was like, that is something that I need in my life. And so I it's interesting because in military school, most of the people there are not there by choice. At least that was the case in my military school. So there's a handful of us that had actually raised our hands and said, yes, we want to do this. Most people were there kicking and screaming, but it was exactly what I needed.
No, it truly is. The discipline creates freedom in your life. And I think that you have to understand that kind of mechanism back and around. And what's interesting is something else I want to hit on there. I spent 20 years in the restaurant business. So I commend you. And I also, I know those struggles. It's interesting. I fought addiction and alcoholism in my 20s and on them in my 30s. And it's one of those things where that's kind of the forefront problem that everybody talks about in America and so on. But as I've coached and as I've talked to many entrepreneurs, I actually think the thing that we don't talk about at all is bankruptcy. I think bankruptcy really there is some quintessential shame associated with that.
It's a huge stigma. And just internally, like the guilt I felt, the failure I felt, that I failed my family, I failed myself, I failed my partner that I drug into the business with me. I'm like, hey, this is going to be great. I failed all of these people, not to mention all of the employees that we had hired that I had to, I failed the suppliers. It's just this immense capital F failure that is what I felt in my life. And to rebuild from that, it took me at least a while to kind of pull myself up and get back through that. Just to get through the credit issues that causes is 7 to 10 years to get through that. I mean, it's a real long rebuilding process to go through. And then to get through the feelings of failure and ineptitude. Now, the good news is on the other side of it, there's so many lessons to be learned. Like as I got through that, there's so much that I learned. I learned about hubris and about, mentors. I learned about the benefit and power of masterminds and mentors and specialty groups that I didn't have in my life back then. Now I'm surrounded by those kind of things, and it helps me to make better decisions and to hopefully minimize or mitigate mistakes.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to that guy as you sit here today?
To the guy sitting there staring down the barrel and thinking, this is my future, I'm going to have to pull the trigger on bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest things I say, first of all, there are other options. Okay. So I would say this before you just dive into that, I would say, look at all of your options, right? A lot of times you can negotiate with creditors. You can, rather than file bankruptcy, they get nothing right there. And so there is an opportunity you might be able to, I kind of knew that way back when, but I felt so overburdened and overwhelmed that the bankruptcy for me was the easier trigger to pull right there than to try to go. Maybe it was, as I look back, and I haven't really thought through this, partly it was an easier trigger pull than the shame of going to everyone and telling them where I was with hat in hand. And it's a great question because I haven't really thought through that. But
it's final then. It's final then.
It's final. It's done. The decision's made. It's done. And
you don't have to live through that ambiguity.
But I just tell people that, there is the other options, right? And the credit repair is real. The being, wrecked with no credit for a long time is very real to go through. And so if depending on your situation, there may be other options right there. There could be options to, even though your business may be failing, maybe there's a way to sell or salvage or get through some of that as well. But if you have to go through it, I mean, that's why it's there. The bankruptcy court, the bankruptcy act, it's there because occasionally it's needed. And I tell you that you can get through it and to understand. I mean, I'm one of many examples that better days are ahead and learn from it. I would say do like you do in the military and write a detailed after action report of what did you think was going to happen? What manifested, what went wrong? What decisions did you make that led to that manifestation? Do a really detailed after action report and learn from your mistakes.
And what's interesting is I can tell that because I have a hint who you're talking about in your business with Keller Williams, because all my mentors are in GoBundance, and that's why I'm in Tahoe right now with Matty A. Yeah. And so, but I could tell you had a lot of success in real estate, but I've never seen somebody's face light up more when they're talking about their what I know it says it in the name, but your legacy of love, and talk about where this was born and kind of how this matters so much to you.
Yeah, I'm blessed to be able to pursue. People talk all the time about, oh, pursue your passion, go pursue your passion. And sometimes you don't even know exactly what your passion is. But, as a father, first of all, I can say when my wife came to me and told me that we were pregnant, I was scared to death, right? I did not feel prepared at all to be a father. I would try to talk her out of us getting pregnant. Like, let's wait another couple of years. And I was already in my 30s at that time, but I was terrified. I had never done it before. I didn't feel prepared. I didn't feel at the point in my life where I was ready for it. But when, Grace was born, it was one of the most magical things ever. She was just amazing and perfect and beautiful and everything that was right about the world. And so early into her life, maybe about 9 or 10 months old, and when we were pregnant with our second, with Knox, I had a couple of things happen to me, including there was a gentleman, a stranger, walked up to me in a restaurant one time. I was holding Grace. She was maybe 6 months old. And this guy had tears almost in his eyes. And he looks at me and he says, "Don't let a day pass without telling that sweet child how much you love her." He said, "Because the time flies quicker than you would ever imagine." And it kind of really hit home with me right there. I was like, wow, I mean, this guy's strangers coming up to me, misty eyes telling me this. And so that in a couple other things just got me thinking. I was like, okay, what could I do to capture moments in some way? And I thought, this was 2003, right? So I didn't even own a video camera. So iPhones weren't a thing back then. And so, well, I can write a story every once in a while. I can do that. And so I kind of thought through at the time, I was like, do I do pen and paper, kind of journal and pen and paper, or do I do something digitally? And frankly, I can type faster than I can write with pen and paper. So I said, all right, I'm going to do it digitally. And so I just started in a simple Word document back in 2003. I said, I'm going to write down the date, my age, their age, and a little story about what's going on once a month. So I wanted a rhythm that was livable and something that I would stick to. And so I said, okay, monthly, I can commit to that at least one time a month per child. And that's what I did. I started doing it in a Word document, and it was just a really private endeavor. It was just for me and ultimately for them. And I guess as the years kind of went on and passed, well, I learned that you could put a picture in a Word document. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Now I can insert a picture. And then I was like, oh, you can do more pictures. Then I learned you put too many pictures, it crashes on you. But yeah, I started kind of just going through this process. And then I started sharing it with a few other dads and moms. I said, hey, I just want to know you got kids. Let me tell you what I'm doing. And people's eyes would just light up and like, oh my God, I'm going to start doing that. And then they would do it and they would send me text of like their journals and their entries and things they were doing. And they would share with me how meaningful it was that they're following this process now. And I thought that just warmed my heart. It was amazing. And I just continued to share that as the years went on. People started to come up to me and like, dude, you should create something with that. Like, that's actually a really good idea. You should do it to make it easy for the rest of us. And because it's not difficult to do, but look, I ended up with entries in Word doc, entries in Evernote, entries in my phone, and like it's all this stuff is just out there. And so in 2017, bandwidth freed up, and I said, let's go search the market, see if there's anything out there that's already doing this. And I couldn't find anything. There were some journaling apps that were out there, and there were some baby photo apps and things, but there was nothing doing what I was already doing kind of very manually, which was, entering it would track the date, track my children's ages, my age, create like a digital timeline of their life where I could put photos and videos and audio files into it and have it all in one kind of safe, secure digital place right there. I couldn't find that. And so in earnest, we set out to create it. And that was how Legacy Journal was born, was through that process. And now I get to spend my days doing really what I love and helping other dads and moms to do this kind of thing for their families. And it is magical when I have people share with me, what it's meant and what they're doing for their family.
I love it. And I think one of the things that as I get older, I think there's money and then there's fulfillment. And I think there's a way for it to match. But I also know that at the end of the day, I've met people that have a ton of money and they're very unhappy. And I've met people that have no money and they're very happy. And so at the end of the day, I think what we're searching for is fulfillment. And if you can touch somebody's, or you can share in a part of the journey, and that impact is rippled, right? And I'm sure you have multiple stories from people using the apps of things that happen. Maybe not all good, maybe some, bad, but at least they're documenting their journey.
Well, so a couple of things. So several people have shared with me this, and Ken, just an awareness factor, right? Just the fact that I'm aware that these moments are happening, and these are moments that I could save and keep, right? Kid says something really funny. When you have an awareness that reality is in a week, you might not remember what he or she just said. And so the awareness, and let me just go put that in their journal real quick. Let me just go write a quick note because it made me laugh and it made me realize how funny they are, how witty they are. And so they shared with me that the awareness of life has made them more connected to their family. And I'm like, wow, that's a brilliant revelation right there. And the other is, another couple of people have been able to use this process to, document, last moments, if you will, with family members that were not doing well, and to, capture those stories before their family members passed on. And they've shared that that's been really one of the most meaningful things that they've ever done, is to have that so that they can give that to their children and their grandchildren.
It's something that I've probably only thought about a couple of times, but when I was a younger kid at my lake house, I remember my grandfather had worked for Budweiser for 68 years, my great-grandfather. And I remember my dad and his brothers sitting around with a tape recorder, listening to him tell stories about, when he worked for Budweiser and stuff like that. And it's something that's always stuck with me. And I feel like you created a vehicle, which was the app. But I think ultimately what you did is you created gratitude in the journey. And that's what that awareness is. And that was a happy byproduct of probably what you created.
It has been. It's interesting. You kind of mentioned that about your family and the recordings that they were making. My mom passed away earlier this year. And as we were kind of going through all of our belongings and figuring out what we're going to do with everything, the most valuable thing that I came across were a handful of letters that were actually written to my mom from her brother, my uncle. And it was stories about their parents and when they were growing up. And it was such a gift for me to get that and read those stories. And so if, everything that gets passed down, you think, oh, there could be houses and cars and money and all this, that stuff doesn't matter. What really matters in my mind are the lessons and the stories and the family history that gets passed on.
And it's interesting, and not to get too off topic here, but I was in San Clemente interview on a podcast with my buddy. And I think one of the things, as you're a father, I think one of the things is that we're never not a kid to our parents, but ultimately our relationship dynamic needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest, me and my dad don't have the greatest relationship. And I think as I've shifted kind of, okay, you're a human, you're allowed to make mistakes too. And maybe documenting the process or stumbling on those old letters, you get to wake up to the fact that your parents are learning just like you are learning as a kid.
So I'll share with you two things, because it's interesting what you just said. One is you're exactly right. So sharing, a couple of years ago, went through a lot of struggles with my now 17-year-old son, just going through things that boys go through. And I didn't know the right decisions to make. I was just doing the best I could to make the best decision with the information I had at hand. And certainly I talked to him about all those things and verbalized those things as we're going through it, talked to counselors about it. But what I know is that eventually there's a high probability that he may forget those things and that I may forget those things. And so through a couple of those things, I actually wrote stories into his journal just about the stress that I was feeling, my fears that I could lose him to drugs or alcohol, and that he could go down this path. And it was, these are things I wouldn't be sharing with other, it's meant from me to him to read one of these days. And, but I think those kind of stories are invaluable. Then the other thing I was going to share is, talk about the changing relationship between parent and child. Are you familiar with Dr. Kelly Flanagan?
I'm not.
Oh, you got to check out his work. Okay. One of the most amazing writers I have ever found. He's a psychologist, clinical psychologist, does just amazing work. Well, Kelly was at a conference I was at not long ago and shared he's got a senior in high school as well. And he shared this amazing construct and way of looking at things. He said he's taking his son on a weekly meal every week. And he said the first time he sat down with his son, he said, "Hey, do you know why we're doing this?" And so I was like, "Well, yeah, so you can pass on wisdom and knowledge to me." And he said, "No." He said, if I'm not going to bring up any wisdom, anything like that, any advice. If you ask for it, I'll give you all you want. But he said, the purpose of this time together is because our relationship is going to be changing. He said, you're going to be leaving the house soon. And we're going to go from, I'll always be your dad, but we're going to go from a father-son kind of parent relationship into just a connected person relationship beyond here. I thought that was the most wonderful approach to take. So I've implemented that. We're not quite on the weekly rhythm yet, but my son and I have now had a couple of those meals together as well. And to start to just change that relationship, just to answer so that I can get to know him better and understand his interest and where he's headed and what's in his mind.
It only took me 38 years until that conversation, because long story short, I left at 17 with my mom, and then I was abusing drugs and alcohol. And so, he got remarried, and we don't really have a relationship past that. And so I felt the pressure of being talked to as if I'm still 17, even though I've accomplished all these things. And it wasn't until, you ready for this? This is going to give you chills. So I don't speak to my dad that much, maybe twice a year. I had the conversation with Angelo on his podcast about this. I got home to the hotel, and guess who called? My dad called right then. And in that moment, I picked up the phone. I said, "Hey, how are you doing? Hope you're having a great day." And in that instance, the relationship shifted like that.
That is God talking to you, brother. That's right there.
I know. And my mom called too that day, which was really interesting. So they were both feeling it. But it's one of those things as I look to probably have kids in the next year or two myself for the first time. I'm already going to send this app to 3 people I can think of right now, because we just hung out with them. Because of the fires, we were up in Idaho with one of my friends who has 2 young kids, and I bought them, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the kids version, and they're loving it, they're reading it, and I know she's going to love this app, and it really is one of those things as we, and I mentioned this to you that my podcast is kind of that for me. It's anybody that's out there listening, I think it's super important for you to. I think that especially where we are with technology, I think we can move really quickly. I think things happen really quickly in this day and age. And I think if you don't realize how far you've come in a short amount of time by documenting or having something to document, then you really don't know. And it's really interesting because, I look at the first podcast I was on and some of my notes from 3 years ago, and I'm like, who is this guy? Who is this dude? But that's what your apps does. And so, when obviously, you created something, you didn't know what it was going to be. What's your ultimate goal as you look in and you reflect on this? What's your hope for this project of yours?
I want this to just help as many people as possible. Like when we look at our mission, it's to impact 10 million families. And I think that's a really reasonable number. It's a global app. We're in 57 countries right now that we've got, active, customers in 57 countries. So our goal is to impact 10 million families, right? And not just to have someone go download the app, but it's to use it to where they're capturing stories, to where they're capturing some moments, to where they're just snapping a picture, writing a quick little note about what you're proud of with your son or daughter. They need to hear that, right? They need to hear that, and they'll need to hear it beyond your grave. And this is not a death app, right? I keep saying kind of beyond it when you're gone. That's not what this is about. Like I gave my daughter, so my daughter just is a freshman at Auburn right now. And I just gifted her with 18 years worth of the stories of her life because I've been documenting her life, writing little notes and stories. And it was such a beautiful event. And for me too, because in preparation for that, I read through all of these old journal entries. And just like you said, there's such an evolution to recognize about my own growth as a man, as a husband, as a father, in my own role in life right there. And I'd shared the highs and the lows and the wins and the vacations and the struggles, everything with there. And it's just a pretty amazing process. So now my daughter at college has all those stories. So she's got those that if she's having a rough time, she can go kind of look over some of these stories from her dad. And I'll tell you what, a little pro tip for anyone that does this. I have finished every single entry with the words, "I love you with all my heart," so that as my children read these over and over and over again, they will hear that and that validation over and over and over again.
And ultimately, what's interesting to that point is people ask me this question all the time. You coach people, and I just got asked this 3 times today. What's the number one thing that you see in all your clients? And they don't love themselves. And it doesn't really matter what else is going on. It's that somewhere along the line, I don't know if it's a parent or school or whatever, they somehow thought that they were less. And so that your statement there is so important to read that over and over again.
You just hit exactly on back to my friend Kelly Flanagan, the guy I just mentioned. He wrote a book called Lovable. Okay. When we get offline, you're going to give me your address and I'm going to send you a copy of his book because it's absolutely one of my favorite. It is my favorite book I've ever read. I'm going to send it to you. It hits to exactly what you're talking about right there.
Yeah. And ultimately at the end of the day, it's on the back of this, right? On just, I heard a line that said, your ability to be rich is solely based on how comfortable you are with being poor. And it's, everything that we want in life is the exact antithesis of it. So while you're searching for that partner, right, it's actually your comfortableness with being alone that's going to let them show up in your life.
It's so true. It's so true. And that perspective is often lost on so many people. Because
it's just one of those things. And so, what would be your businessman? You've had ups and downs. You've created an app. For anybody that's listening up there, just give them 1 or 2 tips that you would be if they're struggling right now or they're getting started on their investing journey. What advice would you give to them?
A couple of things. One is, my favorite word in this world is Kaizen, and Kaizen means continuous improvement. It kind of started from the Japanese factory era in cars and whatnot, and it's about just getting a little bit better every day, every week, every month. You don't have to make monumental strides. It's just small little changes that when you look back over 3, 5, 10 years, you won't recognize the person you were before. So I would encourage people to constantly pour into themselves to become the better version. And one way that I do that is I read a lot. I read every day, a few pages, 5, 10, 15 pages a day, every single day. And over that, that adds up to, 10 to 20 books a year that I end up reading. And I didn't start that process, by the way. You mentioned GoBundance. I met, first time I met Hal Elrod was through GoBundance and read Miracle Morning. And at that point I started reading in this kind of way. And it's made such a material difference in my life that I can't tell you. And then the third thing is, seek out mentors and people to help guide you, whether it's from a coaching relationship or a tribe you become a part of, or a group of mentors, or just a small group of friends that they're going to elevate you, right? It's often said that you kind of are the sum of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so, but seek that out and elevate your life. So just a handful of things I'd tell my own children or anyone else.
I love it. And how do people find out about the app and your project and everything?
Yeah, please come check us out at legacyjournal.app. So legacyjournal.app, can check us out there. Love to have you. If you want to check out our laundromat, you can look at Laundry Luv, LUV.com, laundryluv.com. So learn a little bit about both of us there.
I love it. Guys, if you like this episode, make sure you send it out to your friends, share it with somebody that's going to get some value from it, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Construct Your Life with Austin Linney. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to start constructing your life by taking immediate action on what you learned. For show notes, resources, and more information on one-on-one coaching with Austin, visit constructyourlifepodcast.com.